The slave market on Frontier Station Delta 7 buzzed with its usual mix of chatter and misery. Beings from across the galaxy gathered here to trade in living merchandise, their voices echoing off the metal walls in a dozen different languages. But today was different. Today, High Admiral Kythera of the Zexian Empire was making a rare personal visit. Kythera moved through the market with careful steps, her tall, silvery frame towering over most other species. Her 4 eyes, characteristic of the Zexian race, scanned the rows of holding cells with clinical precision. Behind her, 2 junior officers followed nervously, their scaled hands clutching data tablets. "Your Excellency," the market owner, a fat, tentacled creature named Blurks, oozed forward. "What an unexpected honor. How may we serve the mighty Zexian Empire today?" Kythera's upper eyes focused on Blurks, while her lower pair continued surveying the merchandise. "I require a personal servant, someone capable of maintaining my private quarters and handling sensitive documents." "Ah." Blurks's tentacles wiggled with excitement. "We have some excellent Centaurian specimens, very obedient, very clean." "I've had Centaurians," Kythera cut him off. "They lack initiative. Show me something different." As they walked past cells containing various alien species, Kythera felt her patience wearing thin. The Andorians were too fragile, the Krell too stupid, and the Marviks shed too much. Then she noticed something unusual. In the last cell on the row, a human male sat cross-legged on the floor, reading what appeared to be a discarded food wrapper. Unlike the other slaves who pressed against their bars, begging or cowered in corners, this one seemed almost comfortable. "What about that one?" Kythera pointed. Blurks's skin changed to a nervous purple. "Ah, the human. We just got him last week. I wouldn't recommend." "Open the cell." "Your Excellency, humans are known to be unpredictable." "They." Kythera's upper eyes narrowed. "Open the cell." The force field flickered and died. The human looked up from his wrapper, and Kythera was struck by his calm demeanor. He appeared to be in his early 30s by human standards, with short black hair and eyes that showed neither fear nor desperation, just curiosity. "Stand," Kythera ordered. The human rose smoothly to his feet. He was shorter than Kythera, as most species were, but he held himself with unusual dignity. "Your name?" "Marcus Chen," he answered in clear Galactic standard. His voice was steady, and he met her gaze directly, something even her junior officers rarely dared to do. "You understand you're being considered for purchase?" "Yes." And I'm wondering why a High Admiral of the Zexian Empire is personally shopping for a slave." A slight smile touched his lips. "Seems a bit beneath your rank." Kythera's junior officers gasped. Blurks's tentacles writhed in horror, but Kythera found herself intrigued. Most slaves would be falling over themselves to appear servile. "You're either very brave or very foolish," she observed. "I found those often look similar from the outside," Marcus replied. Kythera studied him for a long moment. There was something different about this human. He wasn't just unafraid. He was assessing her, just as she was assessing him. "I'll take him," she announced. "Your Excellency," Blurks protested, "humans are notoriously difficult to control. They're stubborn, they ask questions, they price." Sensing defeat, Blurks named a figure. Kythera paid without haggling, something that seemed to surprise Marcus more than anything else that had happened. As the ownership chip was processed, Kythera addressed her new possession. "You'll serve in my private quarters aboard the Imperial flagship. If you perform well, your duties may expand." Marcus nodded. "Looking forward to it, Admiral." As they left the market, Kythera's junior officers exchanged worried glances. Their admiral was known for her cold efficiency and brilliant tactical mind. But this, purchasing a human, it was unprecedented. What none of them knew, not even Kythera herself, was that this simple transaction would soon shake the very foundations of the Zexian Empire. 3 days into his service aboard the Imperial flagship, Marcus had already broken several unspoken rules of slave conduct. The first was rearranging High Admiral Thera's private quarters without permission. "What have you done to my office?" Thera demanded, her 4 eyes blinking in confusion as she entered the room. Marcus stood calmly by the newly organized desk. "I improved it. Your old setup wasted approximately 27 steps per day walking between commonly used items. Now everything you need is within arm's reach." Thera opened her mouth to scold him, then paused. She slowly walked around her desk, testing the new arrangement. Her most used data tablets were perfectly aligned to her right hand. The communication console had been adjusted to her exact height. Even her ceremonial weapons were displayed more impressively than before. "You did this by watching my daily routine?" she asked. "Yes. Humans are good at pattern recognition." Marcus smiled slightly. "Also, your old system was driving me crazy." The second rule he broke was speaking without being spoken to. During her tactical review meetings, which he attended as her personal servant, he would sometimes make small sounds of disagreement while studying the battle plans displayed on the wall. After 3 such incidents, Cathera dismissed her officers and turned to him. "You clearly have opinions about our tactical plans. Share them." "Are you sure? The last time I offered an opinion, your second-in-command looked like he might faint. I didn't purchase you for your silence, apparently." Her tone was dry. "Speak." Marcus pointed to the display. "Your defense formations are too rigid. You're so focused on maintaining perfect geometric patterns that you're losing flexibility. An enemy could exploit that." Instead of punishing him for his boldness, Cathera found herself engaged in a 2-hour discussion about tactical doctrine. Marcus's human perspective on warfare was chaotic by Zexian standards, but she couldn't deny its potential advantages. The third rule he broke was reading her private tactical manuals during his rest period. She discovered this when she returned to her quarters unexpectedly one night. "Those are classified documents," she said, finding him cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by tactical displays. Marcus looked up. "You didn't restrict my access to them. Besides, how can I serve you properly if I don't understand your work?" Cathera should have been angry. Instead, she found herself sitting down across from him. "What do you think of Zexian battle tactics? Impressive, but predictable. You rely too much on overwhelming force and perfect execution. Sometimes the messy solution is the best solution." "Like humans?" she asked, her upper eyes narrowing. "Exactly like humans." He grinned. "We're walking examples of messy but effective." As the days passed, Thera noticed other changes. Her quarters weren't just organized better. They were more comfortable. The lighting had been adjusted to reduce eye strain. The air circulation had been modified to maintain an optimal temperature. Even her sleep cycle improved thanks to subtle changes in her room's environment. More disturbing were the changes in herself. She caught herself looking forward to their evening discussions. His questions made her think about things she'd always taken for granted. Why did the Empire maintain such rigid hierarchies? Why were some species automatically considered inferior? Why had no one ever questioned these things before? 1 month after purchasing Marcus, Cathera received a concerned message from the Imperial Council. They'd noticed her tactical reports showing disturbing signs of human influence. Her battle plans were becoming less traditional, less predictable. Looking at the message, then at Marcus efficiently organizing her day's schedule, Cathera realized something troubling. Her new slave wasn't just serving her. He was changing her, and even more troubling, she didn't mind. 2 months into Marcus's service, the evening discussions in Cathera's quarters had become something both the High Admiral and her human slave secretly looked forward to. Tonight was no different, except for the subject matter. "Explain marriage to me again," Cathera said, sitting in her favorite chair while Marcus prepared her evening tea. Another human custom he'd introduced. Humans choose their mates based on feelings. Marcus handed her the steaming cup. Love, usually. Though historically, there were plenty of arranged marriages too. He sat down in his designated spot, which had gradually moved from the floor to a chair as their relationship evolved. It's different from Zexian political bonding. Obviously. Thera's upper eyes narrowed while her lower ones focused on her tea. Zexian unions are strategic. We pair optimal genetic matches to produce superior offspring. It's logical. And how's that working out for your happiness levels? Thera nearly dropped her cup. Happiness is irrelevant, Toe. She stopped, realizing she was quoting directly from the Imperial Handbook. You're doing it again. Doing what? Making me question things I've never questioned before. She set down her tea. It's very irritating. Marcus grinned. That's what humans do best. We question everything. It's how we went from living in caves to exploring the stars in just a few thousand years. Their conversation was interrupted by Cathera's communications console beeping. A message from her fleet commanders appeared, complaining about her latest tactical innovations. They called her new strategies chaotic and unpredictable, words that made Marcus smile proudly. They're not entirely wrong, Cathera admitted after closing the message. My thinking has become less Zexian lately. Is that bad? It's different. She looked at him thoughtfully. You've been teaching me about human culture every evening. Perhaps it's time I taught you about Zexian ways. Over the next hour, Cathera explained the complex hierarchies and traditions of her people. She described their evolution from warrior clans to a spacefaring empire, their belief in perfect order, and their drive for expansion. But something strange happened as she talked. With each tradition, she described, Marcus asked simple questions that made her see her own culture differently. Why do lower-ranked Zexians have to walk 3 steps behind their superiors? It's tradition, she answered automatically. Yes, but why? Does it make them work better? Move faster, achieve more. Cathera opened her mouth, then closed it. She'd never considered these questions before. As their discussion continued late into the night, Cathera found herself sharing more personal things. She talked about the pressure of being a female high admiral in a traditionally male role, about her doubts regarding some imperial policies, and about her secret wish to explore beyond the Empire's borders. You know, Marcus said softly, humans have a saying. The only thing constant is change. Maybe the Empire could benefit from a little change too. Before Cathera could respond, her door chimed. Her second-in-command entered, then stopped abruptly at the scene before him. The High Admiral and her slaves sitting as equals, sharing tea and conversation. Your Excellency, he said stiffly, the Imperial Council requests your presence tomorrow. They're concerned about recent changes in your command style. After he left, Marcus looked worried. I should have been more careful. I'm causing you political problems. Cathera stood, her full height impressive in the room's dim light. No, she said firmly. You're causing me to grow. And perhaps, she looked at her reflection in the window, seeing herself differently for the first time. Perhaps the Empire needs to grow too. As she prepared for sleep that night, Cathera realized something that would have horrified her 2 months ago. She was starting to see her human slave as much more than property. The thought should have disturbed her. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the galaxy. The alarm sirens on the Imperial flagship screamed to life at the worst possible moment. Thera had been in the middle of defending her new tactical approaches to the Imperial Council via hologram when the first explosion rocked the ship. We're under attack, her second-in-command shouted, rushing into the command center. The Drachnid fleet appeared out of nowhere. They're using some kind of new cloaking technology. Cathera's 4 eyes quickly scanned the tactical displays. 30 Drachnid warships had surrounded her flagship, while its escort vessels were too far away to help. The situation looked impossible. Standard defense formation Delta, she ordered, falling back on traditional Zexian tactics. But as her crew scrambled to obey, Marcus stepped forward from his usual position behind her chair. Admiral, he said quietly, breaking all protocol by speaking during a battle. That won't work. Be silent. Her second-in-command snapped. This is no time for a slave's opinion. But Cythera had learned to listen to Marcus's insights. "Speak quickly," she ordered. "The Drachnids are expecting Zexian tactics. They've positioned themselves perfectly to counter your standard formations." Marcus pointed to the display. "But there's an old Earth battle that might help. The Battle of Salamis. The Greeks used a narrow strait to turn their enemies' numbers against them." Cythera's lower eyes studied the star map while her upper eyes watched the approaching enemy. There was a dense asteroid field nearby. "It's madness," her second-in-command protested. "You can't possibly trust the humans." Another explosion cut him off. The shields were failing. Cythera made her decision. "All engines full reverse. Take us into the asteroid field." Her crew looked shocked, but obeyed. The massive flagship slowly turned, retreating into the dangerous field of space rocks. The Drachnid fleet, sensing victory, followed eagerly. "Now what?" Cythera asked Marcus, ignoring the horrified looks from her bridge crew. "The Greeks let their enemies crowd into the strait," Marcus explained quickly. "When they couldn't maneuver, they were easy targets. These asteroids will do the same thing. The Drachnids will have to follow us in single file." Cythera understood immediately. "Prepare aft torpedoes. All of them." The flagship weaved through the asteroids, its crew terrified but trusting their admiral. The Drachnid ships, too large to travel side by side, formed exactly what Marcus had predicted, a long single line of ships. "They're boxing themselves in," Cythera said with growing excitement. "Just like your Greeks' enemies." "Exactly." Marcus smiled. "And now, fire all aft torpedoes," Cythera roared. The explosion chain was spectacular. The first Drachnid ship exploded, crashing into the one behind it, which exploded and hit the next one. Like ancient wooden ships trapped in a narrow strait, the entire Drachnid fleet became its own worst enemy. When it was over, Cythera's flagship had survived with minimal damage, while the Drachnid fleet was reduced to floating debris. The bridge crew cheered, but fell silent when they realized their victory had come from following the human slave strategy. The Imperial Council members, still watching via hologram, looked both impressed and disturbed. "High Admiral," one council member said slowly, "we will need to discuss this unusual tactical approach." After the council signed off, Cythera turned to Marcus. She wanted to thank him, to acknowledge how he'd saved not just her ship but her entire command. But such public recognition of a slave was impossible under Imperial law. Instead, she simply said, "Return to my quarters and prepare my battle report." As Marcus left the bridge, Cythera noticed something that disturbed her more than the battle had. The thought of losing him had frightened her more than the thought of losing her ship, and that changed everything. The Imperial Council chamber was silent as the recording of the battle played on the giant holographic display. Cythera stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by the stern faces of 12 council members on elevated platforms. "This is unprecedented," First Counselor Dax Thor said, his 4 eyes glowing with anger. "You've allowed a slave, a human slave, to dictate Imperial battle tactics." "I allowed my ship and crew to survive," Cythera responded, standing tall. "The human strategy was sound." "The strategy is not the issue," another council member hissed. "The issue is that you've allowed this human to contaminate your thinking. Your recent reports show dangerous levels of creativity." The word creativity was spoken like a curse. Back on the flagship, Marcus was being held in a detention cell. Through the force field, he could hear the guards talking about his likely execution. Instead of showing fear, he was calmly reading the cell's safety protocol display, probably looking for flaws, a very human thing to do. In the council chamber, the debate continued. "The human must be executed," Dax Thor declared. "His influence threatens the very foundations of our empire. High Admiral Cythera, you will carry out this sentence personally to prove your loyalty." Cythera felt something she'd never experienced before: pure panic. The thought of executing Marcus made her feel physically ill. She opened her mouth to protest, but centuries of Zexian training kept her silent. Furthermore, Dax Thor continued, you will undergo psychological reconditioning to remove any human contamination from your thought processes. That's when Kythera had three realizations, each more shocking than the last. First, the empire she'd served loyally for decades was afraid of change, even when that change made them stronger. Second, everything Marcus had taught her about questioning traditions and thinking differently wasn't contamination, it was growth. Third, and most shocking, she had fallen in love with her human slave. No, she said quietly. The council chamber went completely still. What did you say? Dax Thor's voice was dangerous. I said no. Kythera's voice grew stronger. Marcus has shown me that the Empire's greatest weakness is its fear of change. We call ourselves superior, yet we're terrified of new ideas. A single human slave managed to defeat an entire Drachnid fleet because he thought differently than we do. This is treason, a council member whispered. This is evolution, Kythera countered. Humans went from primitive creatures to spacefaring civilization in a fraction of the time it took us. Why? Because they embrace change. They question everything. They're not afraid to fall in love. The last words slipped out before she could stop them. Dax Thor stood up slowly, his face showing horror. You've developed emotional attachment to your slave. This is worse than we thought. Guards, arrest High Admiral Kythera for corruption of Imperial values. As Imperial guards approached her, Kythera made one final choice. She pressed a hidden button on her uniform, a signal she and Marcus had developed for emergencies. In his cell, Marcus saw the small light on his collar change from red to green. He smiled. Right on schedule, he whispered, reaching for the hidden panel he'd discovered in the cell wall. Back in the council chamber, Kythera fought off the first wave of guards with traditional Zexian martial arts, mixed with some very untraditional human street fighting moves Marcus had taught her. The Empire will hunt you forever, Dax Thor shouted. Kythera paused at the chamber door, looking back at the council that had once meant everything to her. Then perhaps it's time for the Empire to learn another human concept, revolution. And with that, she ran toward her future, knowing Marcus would meet her at their predetermined location. It was time to show the Empire exactly what happened when Zexian discipline combined with human passion. Marcus was exactly where Kythera expected him to be, in the ship's emergency hangar bay, beside a small but fast scout ship. He'd already disabled the tracking systems and prepared it for launch, proving once again that humans were remarkably good at planning escapes. You're late, he said with a smile as she ran in. The council had more guards than expected. Kythera typed in her override codes, sealing the hangar doors. And Zexian martial arts are not designed for fighting multiple opponents at once. That's why I taught you human street fighting. Marcus was already powering up the ship, though I never expected you to use it against the Imperial Council. Alarms blared throughout the flagship as they prepared for takeoff. Kythera knew they had minutes at most before the entire Imperial fleet would be after them. Why did you do it? Marcus asked as they worked. Why risk everything? Kythera's 4 eyes focused on the ship's controls. Because they wanted me to execute you. That's not a complete answer. Because, she hesitated, then remembered how humans valued direct honesty. Because I love you. The ship's engine stuttered as Marcus's hands froze on the controls. He turned to her, his eyes wide. You know that's impossible under Imperial law. Imperial law also says humans are inferior beings, and you've proven that wrong many times. Kythera activated the launch sequence. The Empire is wrong about many things. As their ship shot out of the hangar, the flagship's weapons remained silent. Kythera's last command codes were still keeping them locked down, but that advantage wouldn't last long. We need to get to the Outer Rim, Marcus said, plotting a course. There are free colonies there, places where species mix freely, where nobody cares about Imperial laws. No, Kythera said firmly. We're going to the Imperial capital. Marcus stared at her. That's suicide. That's strategy. Thera smiled, showing her sharp Zexian teeth. You taught me to think differently, remember. The Empire needs to change, and we're going to change it. She explained her plan as they dodged the first wave of Imperial pursuit ships. She would invoke the ancient right of challenge, a forgotten law that allowed any Zexian to challenge the Empire's traditions through trial by combat and proof of worth. If we succeed, she said, we could change everything. Make it legal for different species to marry, to hold equal rank, to love, Marcus finished softly. Then he grinned. It's crazy, dangerous, and probably impossible. In other words, it's perfectly human. I was thinking it was perfectly Zexian. Precise, strategic, and according to ancient laws. Maybe, Marcus said as they prepared to jump to hyperspace. That's why we work so well together. We're both right. As their ship vanished into hyperspace, Cathera thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. She bought a slave and found a partner. She'd sought a servant and found love. She tried to maintain tradition and instead became a revolutionary. You know, Marcus said, reading the determination in all four of her eyes, humans have another saying, love conquers all. Then the Empire doesn't stand a chance, Thera replied, reaching for his hand. Because I plan to conquer it with both love and law. Behind them, Imperial ships searched in vain as the former High Admiral and her former slave raced toward the Imperial capital, carrying with them the seeds of revolution. Not a revolution of violence, but one of change, growth, and the most powerful force in any galaxy, love. All because a proud empire made the mistake of thinking they could enslave the human spirit, not realizing that humans had a habit of freeing not just themselves, but everyone around them. The imperial capital's great arena hadn't been used for a trial by ancient law in over 300 years. Today, it was packed with thousands of Zexians, all come to watch something unprecedented. A High Admiral and her human slave challenging imperial tradition itself. Cathera and Marcus stood at one end of the massive arena. She wore her full military regalia, while he wore a simple black outfit that allowed easy movement. The whispers of the crowd washed over them like waves. Are you sure about this? Marcus asked quietly. The trials of union were designed for Zexian nobles, not humans. That's exactly why we must do it, Cathera replied. To prove that humans are our equals. First Counselor Daxthor's voice boomed across the arena. High Admiral Cathera and human slave Marcus Chen have invoked the ancient right of challenge. They will face the 3 trials of union. If they succeed, their union will be legally recognized, and their proposed changes to imperial law must be considered. If they fail, he paused dramatically. The penalty is death. The first trial was the test of minds. 2 massive quantum computers descended from the ceiling, their screens showing complex battle scenarios that had to be solved simultaneously by both participants. Remember, Cathera whispered, Zexian precision. Combined with human creativity, Marcus finished. Let's show them what we can do together. Their fingers flew across the controls. Where Cathera calculated exact firing solutions, Marcus suggested unexpected strategies. When she saw the perfect formation, he saw the perfect way to break it. Together, they solved scenarios that had been designed to be impossible. The crowd fell silent as they completed the first trial in record time. The second trial was the test of bodies. Combat drones surrounded them, armed with stun weapons. Back to back, they faced the onslaught. Thera's Zexian combat training complemented Marcus's human adaptability perfectly. When she moved left, he moved right. When she struck high, he struck low. Just like dancing, Marcus said as they fought. You still need to teach me human dancing, Cathera replied, taking down 3 drones with one sweep. Let's survive this first, he laughed, rolling under her arm to disable 2 more drones. The final trial was the test of spirits, the most difficult and dangerous. Both participants were connected to an ancient Zexian machine that projected their minds into a shared space. Here, they had to prove their spiritual compatibility by facing each other's deepest fears and strongest memories. Thera experienced Marcus's memories of capture, his fear of losing his freedom again. Marcus felt Cathera's terror of failing her people, her deep-rooted fear that love made her weak. But instead of being torn apart by these fears, they drew strength from them. In the shared mental space, their minds worked as one, turning fear into courage, doubt into determination. Impossible, Dax Thor shouted as the machine's readings went off the scale. No pair has ever achieved such synchronization. The ancient machine glowed brighter and brighter as Cathera and Marcus's minds merged completely. In that moment, they understood each other perfectly, Zexian and human, admiral and former slave, two beings from different worlds who had found something greater than any empire's laws. When the light faded, they stood unharmed, hand in hand. The arena was completely silent. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a young Zexian stood up and began to applaud. Others joined in, slowly at first, then in growing numbers. The sound built until it was deafening. Thousands of Zexians cheering for something they'd been taught was impossible. Dax Thor's voice shook as he announced, "The trials are complete. They have succeeded." Cathera looked at Marcus, all four of her eyes shining, ready to change an empire. Marcus squeezed her hand, ready to change the galaxy. Above them, the first rays of the imperial capital's sun broke through the clouds, symbolically marking the dawn of a new era, one where love mattered more than tradition, and where the human spirit had once again proven that nothing was truly impossible. 1 year after the historic trials of Union, the Imperial Palace's Grand Hall was nearly unrecognizable. Where once only Zexians had walked, now beings from dozens of species mingled freely. At the center of it all stood Cathera and Marcus, celebrating their first year of legal marriage. "Remember when you bought me at that slave market?" Marcus asked, adjusting the formal imperial robes he now wore as Cathera's legal spouse. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" Cathera's 4 eyes sparkled with amusement. "I thought I was buying a servant. Instead, I bought a revolution." The changes they'd sparked had spread through the empire like wildfire. After their successful completion of the trials, the Imperial Council had been forced to review its laws regarding interspecies relationships. But that was just the beginning. Minister Chen Cathera, a young Zexian officer, approached Marcus, using his new formal title. "The first graduating class of the Interspecies Cultural Exchange Academy is ready for your inspection." Marcus smiled at the officer's perfect use of human body language, something that would have been unthinkable a year ago. The academy had been his idea, a place where different species could learn from each other, just as he and Cathera had. "You should see their tactical training," Cathera said proudly as they walked to the graduation ceremony. "They're combining Zexian precision with human creativity, Andorian stealth with Krell strength. They're becoming something entirely new." The graduation ceremony itself proved her point. Hundreds of students from various species stood together, wearing uniforms that combined their native dress with imperial styling. Among them were former slaves, now free citizens pursuing their dreams. When Marcus stood to give his speech, he saw First Counselor Dax Thor in the audience. The old Zexian had been their strongest opponent, but even he had changed. Now he served as the head of the Interspecies Advisory Board, admitting that diversity made the empire stronger. A year ago, Marcus addressed the crowd. "I was property. Today, I stand before you as proof that love can transform not just 2 people, but an entire civilization. Each of you represents that same potential for change." Thera joined him at the podium, their hands clasped together. "The empire was built on the belief that perfect order brings perfect strength," she added. "But we've learned that true strength comes from embracing differences, not fearing them." After the ceremony, they returned to their private quarters, the same rooms where they'd first shared their evening discussions about human culture and Zexian traditions. But now the rooms were different, decorated with items from both their cultures, symbolic of their united life. "You know what still amazes me," Thera said, looking out at the capital city's sparkling lights. "How one small change can affect everything. One purchase at a slave market. One person willing to question tradition," Marcus added. "One love strong enough to challenge an empire." They finished together. A message flashed on their communication console. Another group of worlds was requesting to join the reformed empire, attracted by its new policies of equality and cultural exchange. The revolution they'd started showed no signs of slowing down. "Ready for another day of changing the galaxy?" Marcus asked, reaching for her hand. Cathera's 4 eyes met his 2, filled with the same love that had given them the strength to challenge everything. "With you. Always." Outside their window, ships from 100 worlds moved through the capital skies, their lights twinkling like stars. Each one carried beings who now lived in an empire where love knew no boundaries, where former slaves could become leaders, and where the combination of Zexian order and human spirit had created something greater than either civilization had imagined possible. All because a proud Zexian admiral had made the wonderful mistake of buying a human slave, never realizing she was actually buying her own freedom, and the freedom of countless others in the process.